You're just in time as we go back in time and cover one of the greatest offenses in all time, the Notre Dame box offense, with Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com has studied, and it's coming up right after this.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history, and welcome to another exciting evening of talking about some great football history. And Timothy P. Brown of Football Archaeology joins us here each Tuesday to help us preserve and look back at some of this great history. Tim, you're with us tonight. Thank you again, and welcome to the Pig Pen.
Hey, look forward to chatting, Darren, and I know that you are a Notre Dame fan. And I heard your team is doing well this year. And so we can talk about some things that they did in the past. And maybe there's a tidbit out there related to this.
Okay.
By the time this segment airs.
Yeah, folks, we're recording this before the national championship game. So, of course, you're watching this afterwards. So we don't know the outcome. So we really can't talk about the game in 2025. But we can talk about some games 100 years earlier when some very famous people played for the Fighting Irish and did some very unorthodox things at the time. And one of those is what we're going to talk about tonight with our topic. And it's on the Notre Dame box offense. And Tim, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the history of the Notre Dame box.
Yeah, so, it's probably in the 20s, 30s, 20s and 30s. It was one of the two major offenses that people ran. The other one was the single wing or double wing, both Pop Warner offenses. And people sometimes say that the Notre Dame box, sometimes people call it the Notre Dame shift, but they basically mean the same thing. Sometimes people say it's an offshoot of the single wing. Well, actually it existed before the single wing, right? So it has its origins at the University of Chicago under Amos Alonzo Stagg, and there's a guy that played there named Jesse Harper. Well, he ended up coaching at, I think he was at Wabash first, and then Notre Dame. But he led Notre Dame for 7-8 years, something along those lines. And one of the he was at Notre Dame coaching them in 1913 when Rockne and Gus Dorius, kind of had a more innovative pass offense than a lot of other people at the time. And they beat Army kind of famously beat Army that year. But then Rockne kind of took that core offense and then adapted it. And so it's a little bit different. For the most part, if you don't really know the difference between single wing and Notre Dame box, you might look at them and say it's the same thing. But there were a couple of big differences. One was that the single wing tended to be an unbalanced line, and then you overshifted the backs as well. Whereas the Notre Dame box tended to be using a balanced line, and then you overshifted the backs. But it started like when they came out of the huddle, or if they didn't huddle and they just lined up, they would start in the traditional T, and then on a signal, so there's a rhythm to the snap count, the backs would shift so that there would be basically the right half would be kind of just behind the right end, or maybe outside of them a little bit, and then the quarterback and the fullback would shift so that they were kind of stacked behind one another, a couple yards in between them, but kind of in the guard center gap, and then the tailback would be directly behind the center. And he was typically the guy who was farthest back, like the single wing, had a similar kind of situation. Um, but again, everybody would shift it at once, and then the the and it could go to the right or to the left. The end on the side of the shift would also move, and like half the time you would kind of do a little bit split out, maybe a couple of yards, and then that wing guy would be in between the tackle and the end. But a lot of times he would just fake a shift. He'd like get up, kind of step out a yard, and then go right back to where he was. And then typically he aligned like a half a yard off the ball. So still legally on the line, but off the ball a little bit. Um, so anyways, they did all that stuff. And it was, when this was happening, football didn't really have rules yet about how long you had to stop after you shifted. So part of the whole benefit of doing these shifts was you could move, and defense wouldn't know if you're going left or right. So you could move, and then they wouldn't really have time to shuffle themselves over and reposition themselves. And so it worked best if you did like 1, 2, everybody shifts, and then boom, 3, you snap the ball, right? As everybody gets positioned. And so then the early huddling, that was some of the benefit of breaking the huddle was you went right into your position and snapped the ball, right? So that was, and so then people were complaining about that. And so then they eventually, I mean, they tried a couple different ways, but by like 27, 28, then they implemented rules that said, you have to pause for a full second. And so now that's become the norm, and we think, of course that's the way it is. But if you look at it, if you look at films of that, um, like the 1926 or
28.
28, yeah, 28 Notre Dame Army game, then you see, people still moving around at the snap. They're not moving forward, but they're moving around a little bit. They're shifting. So, the game just looks a bit different because of that. So with all that flexing, one of the other things that a couple of other benefits of the Notre Dame box was that they would rotate the players around. So if you were going to pass, you might put your best passer in that tailback position. If you were going to run a sweep, you might put your fastest guy in that tailback position. And so they moved them around a fair amount. And even like, Don Hudson, this is later on with the Packers, Curly Lambeau, who played at Notre Dame under Rockne, the Packers used the box. And so when they started splitting that end, everybody says, well, Don Hudson was the first true split end. Okay, well, yeah, that's what we're talking about here. He split off from the Notre Dame box. And then he went further out than people traditionally had. So anyways, it was an offense that, because you had these wings and the backs kind of positioned towards the edge, they could get out into pass patterns. And so it is a passing friendly offense. When you look at film, it's not a very pass blocking friendly offense. The pass blocking was actually horrible most of the time. And they could also do things like just the way that the quarterback was positioned. If you could do like quarterback sneaks by snapping the ball kind of laterally to the quarterback, and then he'd run it up the gut. They used a lot of misdirection. So if you see films of that era, there's guys kind of crossing back and forth. They did some of the spinner type things out of the offense as well.
And,
So
and
lots of misdirection. Yeah,
I think that's where people maybe get the confusion of the single wing and double wing, because that's some elements of that offense where they would do the crossing and the fake handoffs and the handoffs
yeah,
and
yeah,
misdirections. But yeah, you could definitely do that out of the box. I just love watching the box. It's so mechanical to it. There's a mechanical element that's like really appealing to watch these four men sort of shift in unison, and sometimes the end. And the other thing I think is really unique about it is when we think about men in motion, usually they're moving laterally. There's sometimes that tailback would be moving backwards to take the snap. I don't know what so he had a more of a running start once he got the ball, or he could run into the ball and have that momentum.
yeah,
But it's kind of unique how it motions, and it's fun to
Yeah,
watch.
I mean, if you read, you read stuff about so like one of the first, supposedly the first people that were doing the spiral snap, so deep snap with the spiral. Supposedly that was Springfield, the YMCA training school at Springfield College. And so, and one of the things that, yeah, I've been reading, they were pretty early on in the development of the forward pass as well. And so the guy who was the coach there, McGurdy, he was always big on you had to have a center who could hit the man as he was running left or right, the tailback running left or right, because it just gave him the running start, like you mentioned. But like with Notre Dame, a lot of times you see them snapping the ball to the tailback on a pass play, and he starts backing up. So they're drop the tailback is dropping back as the snap occurs, and then he continues dropping back as these guys are rushing at him. Because like the O line, it like hits him once and that's it. And then it's whoosh. I mean, they half the time they're backpedaling. They can't, I mean, it's not like a quarterback whose feet are planted and they're thrown with the same motion time after time. It's like it's a mess. And so it's no wonder they'd complete like 40% of their passes, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, passing back then was what a mess.
And centers were, I mean, they're important now, but like you say, they were so important back then. Some of the research, and I wrote a little bit about his brother, but one of the Stein brothers, Herb Stein, played for Pop Warner at Pitt. And that was one of his claims to fame. Of course, Pop Warner, many say he's, I don't know if he created the single wing, but definitely innovated off and made the double wing out of it. But Herb Stein was so popular because he could snap to any of those backs back there with great accuracy. And you know, so a project I'm working on right now is a lot of centered around Herbstein, and it's, he did that same thing in the professional level and made him a very popular man to have at center. So it's
Yeah.
kind of cool thing what they could do with the ball.
Well, I mean, you think about it, it's like, if you didn't have a center who could aim the ball properly and lead a runner, then you took it out of your package, right? I mean, if you had that, great, and then you can there were more options available. So I mean, it really did make a center that much more valuable, if they had that skill set. So,
Yeah.
but even then, I mean, like you watch these Notre Dame box plays, and it's just like a bunch of guys running it up the gut. I mean, despite the misdirection, a lot of times the plays are still going in between tackle or at least in between ends, right? So it's
Yeah.
all close formation plays. Yeah, they sweep from time to time, but the bulk of them, it's still, you know, in between the tackles on misdirection, or it's a snap to like the tailback of the quarterback, and boom, they run it right up the gut, kind of like a QB draw nowadays, right? So
Yeah.
it's
I would have loved to see Notre Dame run that offense this year with having Riley Leonard and Jeremiah Love and some of the other really strong backs that they have. I think that would have been kind of entertaining if they just pulled that out in a short yardage. Because everybody knows that Riley Leonard's probably going to go on a 3rd and 1. He's probably going to take a shotgun snap and find an A gap on either
yeah,
side to run it. But running out of the Notre Dame box for Notre Dame, that would have been something with a
yeah.
running
Well,
quarterback.
and it's funny you say that, like I said, I mean, you watch some of these, like that 1928 film, you watch it, and there's a lot of the plays. I mean, it just looks like a QB draw, right? I mean, it's really no different than that, or even like a wildcat sort of thing. But so I mean, it's one of those places where there's nothing new under the sun as far as that particular play goes, right?
But a modern defense having that come out, they weren't preparing for it, and you see these guys in a box all shifting together, and you're like, well, what the hell's going on here? Why
Yeah,
why are they
yeah,
like that?
yeah. Well, and then, but even then, nowadays they're still all inside the box, right? I mean, there's all the backs. Maybe the wing is a little bit further out, but otherwise they're all in a closed formation. So it's still you're not spreading the defense, right?
Right.
So I think modern defenses wouldn't. have a difficult time, wouldn't
Yeah,
have a
they're
difficult time with that. But
a little bit more gap integrity, I think, on defensive linemen these
yeah,
days.
well, one of the other things that's really fun when you look at like that 1928 film is uh, there's a running back that if you check out the film, he's got white tape on his legs and he's number one playing for Notre Dame, a guy named Frank Collins. And there's a couple of plays where he's pass blocking, right? And like nowadays, we expect a back to stick his face right into the defender who's rushing the quarterback, right? He didn't, I mean, now part of it is you couldn't use your hands in blocking, but like he was not looking to hit anybody when he was when he was the back blocking for the quarterback. And they didn't have pockets back then yet, but I mean, it was just like, I mean, it's one of these things we think of how tough those guys were, and boom, boom, boom. It didn't look like on those blocking plays when he was asked to block. He didn't look like the toughest guy on the field.
Maybe that's why they more referenced it more of interference than
Yeah,
blocking. just
yeah,
getting away for a
yeah,
couple seconds. Just
yeah. I mean, there's others where there's I just watched it today, so it's fresh in my mind. But there's other situations where like somebody goes up the gut, and a defensive back comes up and just nails them. So I'm not saying they weren't hitting back then. There's plenty of that going on. But there's other times where it's just like, well, you're playing for Notre Dame, and you're not the most aggressive human being on the field.
right.
It just seems
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah, I think the defense was more of the hammer than the nail back then, where maybe it's a little bit more, both ways in today's game.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very interesting offense and very great look at history. And Tim, you talk about history of football quite a bit, and a lot of formational things and jargon and evolution of equipment and players and positions. But how can folks get into seeing what your daily tidbits are?
Yeah, just go to footballarchaeology.com. It's a Substack site. So if you already have the Substack app, or you've got a profile there, just subscribe. If you don't, you can just put on your email and subscribe, and then you'll get, every time I publish something, you'll get an email about it. About a third of the email, about a third of stories are free, and the other 2/3, you need a paid subscription to read the whole thing. But otherwise, just go out and check out the site, see what you think, and
All right.
take a look at the free archives.
All right. Well, Tim, we appreciate you coming on once again and sharing your knowledge of football history with us, and enlightening us some more. And we'd love to do it again next week.
Very good. Look forward to it.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.